theatre shows. I still do. Like, what seems to have really worked out quite well is I had a little run last year of doing loads and loads of depths on, like, there's a touring show, Bat Out of Hell. Jim Steinman, music of Jim Steinman. And it's kind of like a We Will Rock You type vibe thing. And it's great, you know, real, like, could pretend I'm 18 again, you know, like a Floyd Rose locking whammy guitar and dive bombs and all that kind of stuff. It's brilliant, you know, absolutely. You know, I had to go and buy a guitar for it because I don't normally, I love that kind of stuff. And that's my roots, you know, is trying to Van Halen or whatever. But I didn't own anything that could do that, you know, with a big locking trem.
Ibanez Gem or something. Yeah.
So I had to buy like a fluorescent metallic Jackson and you know, and at the time of my life, man, it's brilliant, you know, just really great fun, you know. But it's what that's kind of done is now the word seems to have got out around the sort of the theatre scene that there's somebody who lives in the Northwest who can actually do that kind of stuff, and that's worked out pretty well because a lot of the musicians that tend to do that kind of stuff tend to be more London based, just because of the nature of the fact that, you know, I always say the same thing. If you go on the underground and you go from the top of one escalator to the bottom, you will have passed about 15 posters for shows.
Yeah, easily.
Because there's just, that's all there is. The West End's just full of shows. So because there's demand, then people kind of tend to go there to do that kind of stuff. But then those shows, they all tour. And generally speaking, you know, if you can find someone who's only got to travel an hour to the gig as opposed to someone who's got to travel 4 hours, then they're probably more likely to say yes. So it seems like what's happened for me is a lot of these bands, they tend to have like kind of regional guys that they call upon, you know, so they'll have a guitar player up in Scotland or whatever, and anything at that end, they'll give it to them. They'll have somebody who's down in Devon or whatever, you know, and then, so I seem to be kind of, you know, reasonably in demand, like
as the Northwest guy,
the North Midlands, so anywhere sort of within a couple of hours, like you know, because it's like a lot of these things, word gets out, you know, it's like you know, it's all on recommendation, isn't it? It's all.
I was going to say it's all on recommendation, and it's a testament, you know. Do you think that, you know, you honing your skills to the point that you have, you know, where you're constantly ever since I've known you, it's like practice.
Yeah.
It's do you attribute that to being like, that is how I've gotten these opportunities and how I've gotten them, you know?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you know, and that's not, you know, not that I'm suggesting that I do anything that anyone else does, you know. I mean, I know the guys that I see that are around me, they've obviously done the same thing, you know, they're meticulously, you know, like, so for example, you can tell when someone's doing one of those shows and they're bluffing it, you know, and it's like, and it's not pleasant for them, you know, it's usually, it's almost, I mean, I get it. There's always going to be a situation where there's an emergency. Someone's had to pull out of something at the last minute and someone has courteously jumped in and they haven't had time to look over stuff, you know. That's a tricky one, that, Ben, because I've had situations before now where people have called me to do things like that at like very, very short notice.
Right.
And you think, okay, do you jump in and do it underprepared? In which case, people forget very quickly that you were doing them a favor. What they remember is that you turned up underprepared and It's like, in one call, it's like, thanks for helping. Then the next time they've forgotten about that and you just turn up and you made a mess of it. So there have been instances where I've had to be really honest and go, I don't think I'm going to have time to do that, to do a good job on that. You know, it's like, you know, so the thing, what I've found with things like theatre shows, is people often think you've got to be like an amazing sight reader. And, you know, I'm sure this isn't a secret to anyone who does any of those shows, but I'm practically not reading any of it, you know, like in terms, I've actually learned the parts, you know, I've actually spent the time.
Committed them to memory and spent the time. Yeah.
The way that I see it is the really tricky parts, I've committed them to memory. The easy parts, yeah, sure. The parts that I look at and go, okay, that's not a problem. There's no reason for me to commit that to memory because it's super easy. And the reason for that, it's not because it's to do with any kind of deficiency in your reading. It's usually because of the fact that at the same time as you might be having to do that, you've got 3 or 4 other things to do, you know, or at least 2 or 3 other things to do. You might have to be looking at the MD or the band leader if there's no conductor. and taking a cue, so how committed can I be to head in the iPad or head in the score if I've got to be looking to the conductor for a cue, looking to the bass player to turn the track. Oh, there's going to be something where there's
something to do. Yeah, there's a lot of jobs. Yeah.
Yeah. So I found I can't be that I can't have my head in the map, so to speak, because I've got to be looking around at what's going on around me. Or the other thing that you'll find with guitar, the tricky thing, the thing I find the most difficult, or that I have to practice the most, it's usually not a playing thing. It's usually getting from this part to that part while switching the overdrive off and turning or going from this patch to that patch, or you've got 4 bars to put the acoustic down to pick up an electric and then come.
Yeah.
Like it's all that, like the juggling side of things, like where you've got to kind of think, okay, I've got to get from an acoustic part to an electric part, and then it's this sound and that part. And if I'm trying to do all of that and then actually be immersed in the score, forget it. The wheels are going to fall off for me. Now, I'm sure there might be some absolute, Mitch Dalton or someone like that who's an absolute sight reading ninja, maybe, or Pete Callard or someone like that, right? I know those guys are amazing at this kind of stuff. Maybe they can do it. I can't, right? So I'm aware of the fact. And also maybe it's not that that I can't. It's also the fact that I don't want that sort of feeling of dread on the way to the gig, I want to turn up there and go, you know what? I'm on top of this. I know it, I know
what I'm doing. Yeah. I mean, completely, like knowing what you're doing and practicing, and it mitigates all the potential, not all, but a lot of the potential problems when you're live, doesn't it? And as you said, when you've learned the parts and you know what you're doing, your concentration is totally in the music and not just on the, and if there are extra things like juggling guitars or whatever, or the audience or something, you can react properly. Yeah.
If something goes wrong, things go wrong. I did like a Frankie Valli show at the weekend, and something went wrong. It was like one of there's the Colla Voce intro, and then the cue comes in, and then the song's in, and the cue came in, it wasn't anyone's fault. It's just the cue came in, and we were in the song. It's like, okay, but I could cover it for the singer, so that he came in the right place and in the right key. Now that stuff, and that's only I've done that show twice, and the first time I did it was 3 or 4 months ago, just long enough to have forgotten a lot of the stuff, long enough to have to go back and look at it again. But it just becomes, I just think that just becomes your practice for the week, So, I mean, I guess one of the things that maybe, I sometimes get asked on, clinics or whatever, is like, what do you practice? And for me, the most part of the practice is, for the majority of it is based around stuff that's about to happen. Right. That's why COVID was so kind of weird, because for a period of time it was like, I've got no gigs, It's like, well,
why practice?
What do I practice?
Right. Interesting.
Yeah. Then it became for me like it was like thinking about, all right, well, what tunes should I know? Like, so for example, we're playing the style of music like jazz. One of the beauties of that is there's almost inexhaustible reservoir of material. Like, so there's all these standards that I feel like an obligation to know,
Mm-hmm.
For example, this week, I'm doing that this week. One of the things I'm practicing this week, play with a great bass player called Bill Cobham. Bill's been around for a long time. He played with all the sort of trad guys in the 60s or whatever. He's kind of in his 80s now. And every time we played together with the ensemble, he's always said, can you do You Stepped Out of a Dream? And I've always gone, I don't know it, Right. Now I know I'm playing with him again in a couple of weeks, like first week of October. So I'm like, what? He keeps mentioning this tune and I should know it,
It's take a look. Yeah.
Because out of courtesy, and also because now that I've took a look at it, it's a killer tune, and I'm like, why did I never look at this? Why have I not looked at this before? But there's hundreds of those, there's
of course,
so many of them. You can dip into that when there isn't anything else to learn, no show to learn or no new gig or whatever. So I can just pick the wish list of tunes that I should really know that I don't. So I'll dip into that.
Yeah. Do you find that? So like, upcoming material is something that you want to practice because it's got a purpose effectively. Yeah. But do you find that there's certain things like you structure your practice at all? Yeah. So you're saying, you know, I do 10 minutes of this and 20 minutes of this and what, you know, scales and that, you know, is there any of that you?
Yeah, bits of that. I mean, the way I kind of see it, I see the practice things dividing up into maybe 3 or 4 main categories. Like it's a bit like, you know, if you've had your 5 a day or whatever, or, you know, if you've gone through a day and you've not had any vegetables, you know, you might need to address that perhaps, you know. Yeah. And it's like, so the first one and the one that's maybe time sensitive is repertoire.
Yeah.
That's because that has got kind of like,
learn the material for the week or
for then. So for example, I'm doing a thing on Saturday afternoon. I'm depping on double bass with a friend of mine's band, the Chicago Teddy Bears. They're an old trad band. They've been around for forever, you know, for as long as I know. And it's so much so that one of my friends, who's a great guitar player, amazing guitar player, Tony Ormisher, a local guy, like his dad used to be the guitar player in the band. It's been around for that long.
Wow.
So it's a tradition that so many amazing musicians have been either in that band or they've touched it in some way, you know. So they've asked me to do a gig with them Saturday afternoon. And it's all trad material, like kind of like 1930s trad. And I don't really know any of those tunes. So this week it's been a question of, okay, right, how many songs are in the set? There's about 20. They sent me the set list through. I got it through maybe Friday, Saturday last week. So then I just do a quick divvy up of like, okay, well, I can do 4 tunes a day over 5 days. And then on the day before, I'll run through them all, you know, and that's what I've been doing, you know. And so that way, anything that looks a bit scary, I'm not finding out the night before. You know, as it is, they're all okay. They're all kind of okay, you know, but just, I don't want to be that guy, you know, who's kind of like a step behind on the bandstand. I want to kind of, you know, because I want to enjoy the gig. I don't want to be there terrified, sweating, you know, like, like not or feeling like, you know, I want to go there and actually have my head up and be able to enjoy the gig. So repertoire. So that's been kind of this week's thing, because of all the things, I've got like 5 gigs this week, and that's the one that I've not done before, but I've had stuff to learn. So that is a daily thing. So repertoire is a daily thing. I think maintenance of what you've already got, like, so maintaining your pre-existing skills, kind of like a daily thing. Now that, for me, generally speaking, very often takes the form of firefighting, should we say, meaning like I maybe have tried to do something, and it's not come out the way I want, or, you know, and I thought to myself, okay, that should have been smoother than it was, or like I need to refresh this particular aspect of my playing. Yeah. And it might be something that's cropped up in any way, really. It could be something that's cropped up just because I've thought to myself, okay, when was the last time I practiced whatever it might be, you know, or when did I last look at? And it might be a while away. So that kind of like, it's a bit like maintenance, really. You just kind of, that sort of revolves around all the things that you use. So I find if I've touched upon repertoire, if I've touched upon maintenance of what I can already do, then that's a good thing. Then the third interesting one for me is developing new ideas, that kind of working on new skills. That tends to be less, that tends to jump around a lot less. That's usually more focused. That might be based around one particular thing or 1 or 2 particular things. So it could be like I'm doing a real sort of deep dive into a particular topic, and I come back at that, and that's usually going to take the form of maybe a few weeks or maybe even a couple of months on the same thing. Right. So do you have a kind of a not a method or anything, but do you have an approach to how you would practice for improvisation skills? Because we were talking about this, weren't we? And we've talked about this for years, you know, in terms of different approaches of people. But what's your take on it? You know, how would you attack it? Well, I think improvisation is a massive topic, isn't it? So I suppose in a way, like, we have to kind of tie it in. Again, when practice sessions for me seem to feel like the most applicable, and the ones that I get the most from are the ones that seem to tie in the closest with some kind of real world scenario. So as near to as possible how you might be intending upon using this stuff in a real world situation. Yeah. Right. So that could be like, so for example, if we're looking at trying to maybe combine some of these areas, repertoire, existing skills, new ideas, right? So that could be, so something, for example, I've done this morning. I've been looking at that tune, You Stepped Out of a Dream. So I thought, okay, I'm going to play through it 4 or 5 different ways. So first way, going to just play chords, just play through the harmony, right? And kind of improvise a rhythm part, and then I record that. So that's recorded. So that's my backing track for the rest of the practice. Then it's like, okay, so then I'll go on the bass and go, there's my chords. I'm going to see how would the bass line be created against the chord progression. And I'll try and play things because it'll be 5 to 8 minutes long, this backing track. So I'll try different things out. So some of it will be improvised. And then if ever it doesn't work or I screw up, then stop the track. Okay, let me work out why that didn't work. And maybe even sometimes compose a little thing. So particularly if it's a new idea, if I'm trying to get a new idea or new concept into play, then very often starts off as something that's almost like a little composed etude. So for argument's sake, I had a little thing, one of the things I was working on as a new skill was working on things like using wide intervals based off major 7 sharp 5 type sounds, right? And I've got a certain kind of like when I'm using like chord shape type derived things as opposed to linear arpeggios. So it's like broken chords. So taking a chord shape, but using like intervallic jumps within a chord shape. So you don't play the notes consecutively, but it's derived from a chord shape, right? So it starts as a shape, and then you jump around the notes so that you get wide spaced intervals. So for a period of time, I only had one way of doing that. There was only one way, and I tried to shoehorn it into as many actual possible, like, okay, where might I use that? Okay, in this piece, it could go here over this chord. Over a minor chord, I could play it here. Over a dominant chord, I could play it there. Over a major 7, I could go here. Now, that's really contrived, but at least it's given me kind of an example, a working example of what this might sound like.
And you can put it to use immediately as well. You can literally go to the pub and play a song with and put that new knowledge to the test.
Yeah, now I know that it's like, da, 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 here it comes, boom. That it's not really improvised. It's like really like it's premeditated and it's not the most natural, and it kind of feels a little bit odd. But at least then there's an example of that happening. So something that I often say to my students is like sometimes knowing stuff's overrated, right? Like meaning, like I've got students who could tell you anything about the diminished scale. They could tell you anything you want to know about the whole tone scale. They know all the modes of the melodic minor scale. But when I go to see them play, I don't hear them using any of them.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, so I have, maybe as a little mantra, I'll often say just to students in lessons, I go, okay, that's great. You know that you're aware of this. If I come and see you play, am I going to hear it?
Yeah.
At what stage? When are you ever going to do that? Right. And if the answer is never, then maybe we've got something's not connecting. There's a connection that needs to be made. And sometimes the players that are the most successful in an improvisation situation are the ones who've got that connection. And occasionally what can happen, you get kind of, incredible musicians. I recently got to play with Borelli Legren. Borelli doesn't know any of this stuff. You said to Borelli, you just played a major 7 sharp 5 arpeggio off the minor third of a minor chord, giving you, minor major 7 or something. He'd go, did I? I've got no idea.
He's no idea. Yeah.
But he's doing it, right? Because, he's maybe heard it someplace else, or he's just stumbled across it in his imagination, and he's made a mental note that when you do this against this, it creates this effect.
Yeah.
When you do that against that, this is what comes out. And he can get to that, and he's obviously found ways to get into that. And his practice, we kind of opened up. We did a masterclass together, and he was really open. He was like, that's what I do. It's like I discover a sound and then try different ways of getting in and out of it. Well, that's what I do. It's just I know what it's called.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the only difference. Right? So there is no difference. But sometimes when viewing it from the outside, you go, oh, he's just completely playing from, like a conduit from God, like he's hit by thunder. No, he's auditioning ideas, right? And then finding out different ways of playing those ideas and then trying to situate them in real music.
Yeah.
That's what that is. And whether or not it's called this or called that, or whether you call it the lick I learned from Michael Brecker, or whether what the actual
The origin of the sound is,
cares, you know, to a certain extent, the listener would never know, you know, because you don't get the opportunity when listening to a record to stop it and get into the headspace of the performer. Whereas, because now there's such a lot of educational material, you know, you can go and have a lesson with Scott Henderson or something, and he plays something. What was that? And you go, I'm playing a major triad, you know, off the flat 5 or something like that. You know, you can kind of get into the headspace of why as opposed to what, you know. So I guess in a way, so part of my practice is, it could be like, shall we say, like improvising, inverted commas, but with some kind of premeditated intention in place. It's like, okay, I've been working on this particular intervallic thing, you know, whatever it might be, you know, the certain arpeggio shape, say. Like, I've got a particular arpeggio shape, right? I'm going to figure out loads of different ways of getting that to work over a particular song, maybe against static harmony, against the groove. Okay, fine. Can I make it work over a groove? Great. What about putting it over something where there's some harmony changes, you know, where it's moving from this key to that key? Could I figure that out? You know, okay, great. I've got to find a way of making it work. How about making it work against the repertoire that I actually use, you know, like the tunes that I'm going to play? You know, and one of the beauties of having so many gigs is that you can just try stuff out, you know, and kind of go, all right, I tried that idea. It didn't really work as well as I wanted to. Why didn't it work? And it
Definitely.
could be.
How important do you think it is? You know, I believe there's only so much playing in practice that you can do in your bedroom. And I find often when I'm learning things, even if I haven't quite got them yet, I tend to immediately put them into, I go to an open mic night, I go to just something and just try stuff. What do you think?
I think you're absolutely right, you know, because it's a different thing, isn't it? Because sometimes what happens in practice, you can have kind of as many goes as you like. And you know, there's a brilliant book, a student actually recommended to me, and I'm eternally grateful, by this guy called Dr. David Allred. He's a sports psychologist, called The Pressure Principle. And he was teaching like Johnny Wilkinson and guys like that, you know, when the England rugby team was winning everything. And taught a lot of, you know, like top level golfers and stuff like that, you know,
right.
Elite athletes, essentially. And he calls it something about trying to mimic the one shot philosophy. Like, so what he had with Johnny Wilkinson would go onto the field, and apologies to anyone who's a rugby aficionado. I'm going to use the wrong term because I don't know what it's called. When they've got to kind of score a try from a really acute angle, you know, they kind of put it somewhere right on the side, and he's got to get it through the posts, you know. And so he'd have a couple, and they'd go wide, and then he'd like put like 10 through on the bounce, you know, or, you know, 5 or 6 through, and he'd be like kind of high-fiving himself, going, "I just got 5 consecutive tries there." But Dave's going, "Yeah, but you missed the first 3, you know." Yeah, it's like you don't get to get your eye in, like in a competitive match. You don't get to say, "Let me have a little warm up go first."
Yeah.
And then, because, you know, like, for example, if a professional football player gets a warm-up penalty first, it's going in. There's no two ways about it. The second one's going to go in. There's no, the reason why people miss is not because they don't know how to kick the ball. It's because their nerve goes.
Yeah.
Right? And the same thing with when we're practicing on the guitar. So I'm practicing this big thing, you know, and because I practice it, I can have 50 goes, and then the 51st go, I get it right, you know, and then I convince myself I can play it, you know, because the 51st time I played it, I got it right. And then for the next 10 minutes, I can play it right. The problem then is you go and try it on a gig, and what you do is that when you play, it's the first shot. That's the first go. And you've been doing something else in front of it. So you're not ready for it. And what you might not realize is all the stuff that you did in front is why you actually were able to do it.
Right.
In the end.
In practice. Yeah.
So what Dave suggested is like almost like a form of like circuit training. So what he had Johnny Wilkinson doing was, okay, you have one shot at that, boom, you missed, right? Do something else, do something else, do something else. So all of the things that he would have practiced in a day. So say he was practicing 10 different or 5 different things, instead of going 20 minutes on this one, 20 minutes on that, 20 minutes on that, because at the end of the 20 minutes, he's doing it perfectly.
Yeah.
But what he wants to know is, how was he at the start?
Right. Interesting.
So what that's led me to do in terms of practices, say, for example, I'm working on a show, right? working on a part of a show. So, for example, I just did like a British Carpenters, did some gigs with them recently. It's like 2 hours of music. In the 2 hours of music, there's probably about 5 minutes of difficult stuff, maybe a bit less, 3-4 minutes of like the snags, you know, the bits that when you see it coming up, you think, all right.
Yeah.
Wrap yourself in. Yeah. Here comes that hard bit. And then, you know, 10 minutes, then a load of stuff that's kind of easy, then another hard bit, then a load of stuff that's kind of easy, then another hard bit. So what I was finding is instead of going, right, okay, I'll practice the hard bit, and then at the end of my practice session, I can play it right. And then I feel like I'm, you know, patting myself on the back. I've got that down, and then go on a gig and screw it up. What I've now got is a circuit of all the hard parts. And I'll go, right, one shot, right? Do the whole gig, just the snags, the tricky parts. You got one go and record it. All right.
That's a great idea.
Boom, right. Here's how you sound. First go at doing that. And if I make a mistake, it's like, well, you haven't got it down. Don't kid yourself, man.
Yeah.
But you're fooling yourself. If I have to take 3 goes and go, oh, hang on, let me remind myself of that. Oh, yeah, I've got it. And then I can play a third shot in. I ain't got it.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
It's not going to get easier when there's an audience in front of me. It's or somebody, you know, like you know, recording, or it's not going to get easier. So I found that if I can't do it, like pretty much, okay, you warmed up. You've not like cold, but you've been doing other things. If I can't just do that thing that I've been working towards, if I can't do it first time, I can't do it.
Yeah, that's such an interesting philosophy, and I think, you know, I suppose you could attribute that to a lot of life things as well, not just music. Or, you know, that's something that, you know, you only ever get that one shot to do.
Yeah,
to have the right conversation, to have the right, you know, meeting, or to do the right plan or something, you know. So interesting. I remember talking to you a long time ago about the Harvard, the Norton lectures with Leonard Bernstein.
Oh yeah, the Leonard Bernstein, yeah.
And the superstructures and all that stuff in Chomsky and, you know, linguistics. Does that still play a part in the way you think about music, or does that, is that sort of, are you a lot more sort of feeling like you, you know, you were talking about Birelli-Legrand sort of playing from the heart kind of thing. He doesn't understand the noise and the shape, but he just goes with kind of how he feels, or you know. But
he's still using tools, though. The thing, my point being is about the Birelli thing is, and he was really open about it. It's not, you know, I think that's the perception from someone looking at it from the outside, is that it's just all kind of, that there's no rhyme and reason to it. But he knows that there's a plan, you know, that's like, okay, I'm using a particular thing, you know, like it's this group of notes or this particular rhythm or this type of, you know, sound against sound or what have you. So what I've found to try, I hope this answers the question, to try to do is to, instead of worrying so much about the what, it's more about the why. So that way, hopefully an idea can come across in a more fluid way. So one thing that I might practice is, like, so for argument's sake, and this might be a way of developing improvisation, right? So say, how do you get away from playing, say, licks? Right. So I might start off. So, you know, not wishing to contradict myself, but what I said before, I'll start off with maybe a concrete example. So I have something that's maybe composed. I want to get a particular idea in. I'll have a composed way of using that idea, but I want to move away from that pretty quickly. Right? So what comes next? What might be, all right, so we've got a kind of a phrase that you've maybe transcribed from someone else, or you've invented it yourself. So I think maybe there's different ways to end this phrase. So the start could be the same. So start with the same 5-6 notes and then go, okay, well, how can I come off in different ways? Could I go to, I know, the higher in pitch? Could I end on the root of the chord? Could I play the same phrase, but maybe end on the third of the chord? Could I play, you could do it in a physical way, meaning could I play this blues lick and try and find a way to come off on the first string? Could I try and find a way to maybe come off on the second string, you know, and then is there a way of maybe coming off on the third string? Or could I play this lick and end with a bend? Okay, great. How about if I end this lick and I end with a slide? What about if I play the same lick and I end with a pull off, or whatever it might be, to try and come up with variations in the moments. And you can practice them in your practice session, But I guess the reason for that is it's so that if then you've got that kind of flexibility in a performance scenario that you can make those decisions in real time. So it's about sort of, I guess, dealing with what you've got in front of you at that time, you know, so as opposed to it being something that's fixed. Then once you've kind of got the, you know, your exit planned, then you can start working on the entrance, you know, go, okay, well, maybe now what I'll do is I'll leave this thing is going to be the same. So I'm always going to end the same way, but I'm going to find different ways to get into that idea. So maybe I'll start from it. I'll slide into the first note, or maybe I'll come from a high note, fall to the stop. So finding ways to get into whatever the idea is, and then getting ways to get out of that. Now, by the time that you've got different options for getting in and different options for getting out, then it becomes more of a fluid thing. So you're dealing more with a concept than an absolute.
Yeah.
You know, so the concept might be, I'm going to play this major 7 arpeggio, you know, off the 5th of a major chord, right? Okay, that's the concept that you're working on. But you've got all these different ways of saying it. Then you maybe throw some rhythmic tools at it and go, okay, so maybe I'm going to play, but I'm going to see if I can maybe begin this phrase on the first beat of the bar and see how that sounds. Okay, and let's give you a certain effect. And go, well, what about if I don't play, I'll delay and I'll come in on the second beat of the bar?
Yeah.
How would that sound, you know? And then not that you're actually going to think, okay, when you're playing, okay, now I'm going to play off the second beat. But each of those things gives you a different sensation. It's like they feel different.
And they sound different as well. Like, you know, I remember we were doing something, and I think I was running up and down a particular, I can't remember what it was, but it was a particular scale. And you were saying, have you tried just doing exactly the same thing, but in triplets, as opposed to, you know, just in quavers or whatever it was I was doing?
Yeah.
And straight away, it
feels
straight
different,
away just kind of had a different flavor. And it was the same notes, but I was like, I was thinking, oh, wow, you know, just such a simple thing. It's just a rhythmic device.
Well, this is the distinction someone like Borelli would say, right? So like in the course of a masterclass that he did, which I was kind of co-hosting with him, you know, one of the guys in the class was saying, so what do you practice? He goes, well, I don't really practice guitar. He said, I just kind of play, you know. And so, okay, well, let's scratch the surface of that a little bit deeper, right? And so what do you actually consider to be practice, you know? And he said, practice is going up and down scales and arpeggios. I'm like, okay, let's define, you know, like okay, that's practice in his head, right? As opposed to setting a groove up, playing, you know, down, and using the exact same scale, but to create melody.
Music. Yeah,
but that's
melody.
but that's still practice. So now what we're into now is a semantic issue. It's like, what do we define as practice and what do we define as playing?
Yeah.
So my take on it then is, okay, well, why not make your practice like playing? So one thing that I found to be really helpful is instead of practicing to a metronome, right? So, you know, I'm not checking text, I promise you. So just instead of practicing to a metronome, right, get like the one that I use is like this big green monster head, this drum genius.
Yeah.
So don't use a metronome. There's my metronome. Run scales to that.
Yeah.
You're immediately gonna not play them as scales, like as in, you know, like all the notes will be even. So okay, so what we're taught in practice, and I understand there's good reason for this, is contrary to what we might want to do in performance. So when you practice a scale, you're often taught play everything with an even dynamic, play with a consistent rhythm and a consistent timbre, so that every note's kind of even, that the rhythm is stable. Also, don't miss any notes out, you know, play the notes in a linear way, right? Okay. As opposed to creating melodies where we play with
expression,
varied dynamics.
Yeah.
We push and pull the rhythm. We don't necessarily, even if you're playing quavers, they won't necessarily all land in time. You know, you want some to be slightly ahead and maybe some, right? But that's contrary to the way that one might be taught to practice a scale. So I can see why people who want to use it to improvise might think, well, practicing scale is not really helping me. Once I've got the initial scale down, right? Once the initial pattern is down, right? Now that said and done, there is time for practicing things with really stark focus, like removing the expression. Like, for example, if you were working on using different intervallic patterns, you know, where if you want to really like, do you know what all the harmony within a scale? Well, maybe in that instance, you might want to play things in an even way, because that's a step in the direction, but that's not the end result. You know, no one is going to go on stage and go, they're not going to do that. But there's a reason for that, because the first was a major 7, the second was a minor, so now I know what lives in that scale, so to speak. But that's different to someone calling a tune, you're playing St. Thomas or something, instead of C major, and like, okay, what have you got in C major? You know, no one's going to just go up and down the scale. So I guess in a way, you know, going back to the Borelli thing, you know, because that's kind of an interesting one to me. It's a question of what you define as practice, you know. So you know, his stock answer is, I don't really practice. So what do you do? And he goes, oh, I kind of get play-alongs and put them on. You know, I'll kind of, you know, because there's a million play-alongs. There's a guy called Mr. Sunny Bass. I love it. He just plays double bass. So like hundreds of standards. And for like 7 or 8 minutes, you know, if you pick a tune, he will have played it. If it's one of the well-known tunes, and you just put him on, and it's about the closest I can think of playing a duet with someone, you know.
Wow. Yeah.
So there's no reason why you can't, like, you don't just immediately have to go, all right, now I'm just going to like channel, like, you know, creativity. There's no reason why I can't use him and go, okay, now I'm going to play all the arpeggios to each of those chords.
Yeah.
Whilst he's playing. Okay, now I'm going to figure out what my pentatonic options are. Now I'm going to figure out what my triad options are. Now I'm going to figure out maybe what scales I might use. You can kind of line your ducks up in a row in a real life situation. That's kind of like where things like iReel can be good. You know, iReel for me is like, I guess it's the musical equivalent of punching a punch bag. Yeah. It's not going to get you back, you know. It's different doing a couple of rounds with iReel than I would imagine, not that I've ever done it, you know, getting in a ring and sparring with someone. Yeah. Like, because you can't predict what's going to happen. Whereas something like iReel is very predictable. The dynamics don't change. It's the same round and round. So that's really useful for figuring out, like, all right, do you know what notes work well against those chords? Right. Well, maybe that's a good scenario for using that. Whereas when you actually want to play, we want a changing dynamic. We want, like, the fact that what I love about Mr. Sunny Bass is he'll go from a 2-feel to a 4-feel, or he'll play the first chorus quite loud and then he'll drop down, and you've got to respond to that, you know, like you would with
like
a real
conversation in real life. Yeah.
Which iReel and things like that, you know, the host of most backing tracks that you find on YouTube, they don't do that. It's just the same thing for ages. And whilst that's great, what that's not going to give you is like a change in, like, something to respond to. Because I mean, the other thing about improvisation, maybe that might be a different point, but its relevance is sometimes I find my improvisation is not instigated by me. Right? It's something that I might hear somebody else,
moment from somebody else, right?
Yeah. The drummer plays a particular thing, and you go, "Oh, okay, I can." Like, thanks for that. I can do something with that, and then hopefully you might do something. So the improvisers that really, I've got to say, that really impress me, like, that are really just like top level. They're like, you know, the Keith Jarrett's who can play solo.
Yeah.
Like, and it's completely spontaneous, and he's not reacting to anyone. Whereas for me, playing solo as opposed to in a duet, where it's like you can kind of go in with no ideas. It's like, I ain't got anything. What you got? You know?
Yeah.
And if you're by yourself, it's like you're responsible for generating everything.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, so in that case, then you've got to be super resourceful, haven't you? And that's about, I guess, maybe like focusing in, like in a way, one could argue to make that work. Well, certainly for me, you know, improvisation for mortals would be, I'm sure Keith Jarrett can just hear everything, you know, right? Well, what I have to do with that is I have to kind of like the way the eye works, you know, like you focus in on a very specific thing. So I'll think, okay, let's begin with maybe just these 2 notes, and I'm just going to work on a certain rhythmic idea, because I can manage that. I can handle that. That's not too much. That's not going to I'm not going to be overwhelmed by just thinking about those two ideas. Okay. And then maybe I can introduce more into that and then get into kind of a bigger thing and let it sort of evolve. So if I have to improvise by myself, then it's usually, there's usually a very restricted, I'm dealing with less material in the moment. Now that material might change over time, but if you could say, stop, what are you thinking? It's going to be, well, I'm trying to think, what can I do with an A note and a C note? Or I've restricted myself to this range and this, it might even be this rhythm. And now I'm going to expand the notes.
And now I'm going to try,
as opposed to going, can you change the rhythm, the melody, the timbre, the dynamics? Right. It's too much to
process. Yeah.
Yeah, you just get a big spinning apple wheel. That's what you get from me. If I have to think of that. Like, it's too much. So with that in mind, it's almost like your focus shifts. There's a great drummer, Bob Moses. He calls it zones. And Bob's got a massive drum kit, like maybe 20 different things in front of him.
Yeah.
But he says, okay, let's start off with just the snare that's in front of me. I'm just going to play with the snare. And then I'll introduce another sound. And then maybe introduce a third sound and maybe drop the first one. And then I'm into a different place. And all of this over the course of like a 15-minute improvisation. Yeah. And you can definitely hear what the theme is. And rather than it being sort of ADHD, like jumping around, bit of this, bit of that, bit of that, which is really difficult to follow.
As an audience, as a fan and for a listener, it is difficult to follow. Yeah. But also as a performer, I think,
for sure,
like that is hard to maintain.
Have you seen this thing Julian Lage did for John Zorn? Right, it's really worth seeing.
I don't think I have. No, I don't think
he wrote. But basically, John Zorn compiles these books, like essays on music, essentially, and he's invited, a number of amazing, really cutting edge musicians to contribute to this. And Julian wrote one called something like 12 Points for Guitar, right, something along those lines, And they were just like little observations. They're not big. They're basically, some of them are just paragraphs and big paragraphs. And he's been on a few podcasts talking about it because it's quite interesting. But one of the points, which I thought was absolutely amazing, and it's something that I've adopted, and I've kind of like turned it into something else. But the instigation of it came from, he went for a lesson with a piano player, I think, and he was getting into the idea of like free improvisation. Where the piano player said to him like. Well, just play, And Julian was like, well, what do you want me to play? Like play a song, a tune? Like, he said, no, just play, right? Just play something. It doesn't have to be a standard or whatever. Better if it's not. Just play, right? And it was like, okay, right. And he obviously heard something in the performance. I said, okay, here's what I want you to do. All right. Over the course of the next week, I want you to record 10 1-minute improvisations a day. All right. So set a timer, and it's not just noodle. It's not just like random stuff. It's like you want there to be an intro, a theme, some kind of a thing that you're working on, a beginning, a middle, and an end, and try and make it land within a minute if you can, as close to within a minute as you can. Anyway, okay, great. So, and you don't have to do them in one go. In fact, better if you don't. Right. So, you do one. First, as soon as you pick up the guitar, you do one, takes 1 minute, and then you leave it alone, you move to the next one. So he said, okay, so you do that for a week, and at the end of a week, you've got an hour of you improvising to listen to. There's an hour. And so if you said to most people, improvise solo guitar for an hour, they go, I can't do that.
Yeah.
I ain't got that in me. I've not got that much in the tank, But if you say, okay, but could you do it for a minute? Yeah, maybe I could do that, and it could be anything. You could play a blues, play a funk thing, fingerstyle thing, just notes, random, atonal, anything you want, all harmonics, absolutely whatever you want it to be. It's open to you. You can do that, whatever you want. And they said at the end of each week is then you sit down and you spend the hour or whatever to listen to that back with a kind of a pad, and you kind of go, all right, two columns. One column is observations of what you're hearing. And you might listen back to it and go, I use a lot of harmonics. I tend to use a lot of harmonics, or I like open strings. There's tons of open strings there, or I like triplet rhythms. I seem to use triplet rhythms, or I like the key of E. It could be guitar players really like the key of E. Whatever you're hearing, right? Like then it's just an observation. It's not a criticism. It's not like you're going, I suck or whatever. It's just, this is what you kind of gravitate towards. That's the general trends. And then the second column is like, what would you like there to be? Like, what are you not hearing? What sounds are not there that you'd like to be there? So then when you practice, you know what to work on, because it's like, it sort of feeds into something sometimes now. I've again, like the little mantra I often say to new students or people, if they ask me these kind of things, you know, like, I want a lesson or whatever. I go, okay, cool. Like, what do you want to become good at?
Yeah. And often people don't know.
They don't know. Yeah, they don't know. So if you don't know what you want to become good at, how are you going to practice that? How are you going to practice to get good at something that you don't know what that is?
Yeah, for sure.
Whereas if you've listened to yourself play and you go, I'd like to get a bit more dissonance in my playing, or I'd want to use more chromaticism, or maybe like, so for me, I was listening back to, it came from when I recorded the first album, and then I listened back and I thought some players that I like seem to use more kind of like cross rhythmic and polyrhythmic ideas, which were not really there. So then I put steps in place, you know, to actually start doing that. It's like, so now that happens way more often, you know.
And it's much more spontaneous now for you. Yeah.
But it started off as a conscious desire. It was like, okay, what am I not hearing that I'd like to hear?
Yeah.
And it could be you want to be more bluesy. It could be I want to use more chord whatever. It doesn't matter. It's going to be different for everyone. But that whole thing of just taking a little bit of time. So I did that thing that Julian suggested. I didn't do, I did that light. I didn't do 10. I think I did 3 a day. Thought, okay, I'm going to do 3 of them a day, like just 1 minute. But even 3 a day over the course of a week's 20 minutes, you know.
Of course.
All right. So 20 minutes and then, so you say you did 3 a day, 6 days, 18 minutes or whatever. Then on the 7th day, you kind of like, oh, well, let's listen to this week, you know. Now, what I've found happened is some of those things ended up then being the nucleus for compositions, because you go, that's a cool idea, right?
Yeah.
That I would have probably just thrown away.
Yeah.
Right? So now I've developed a kind of a variation on Julian's thing. I kind of call it 10 in 10, right? And what I try to do, set myself 10 minutes, timer, put a timer on 10 minutes. Okay, I'm going to write 10 seconds of music, right, in the next 10 minutes, right? Right. And so what I'm with the view to each month, once a month, I want to write a solo like a solo piece for guitar. And it's not, I don't generally play solo, right? It's not a big feature of my playing, but I'm about to put that right, you know? Right. So I'm now kind of, each month I've done it and set myself a task to go, every month I want a 4 or 5 minute solo piece, and I'm just going to keep adding 10 seconds to it every day. All right. But what I find is it's not the 10 minutes practice. It's the fact that when I know that's coming, I'm going, okay, this is where I got to yesterday. What's coming next? You know?
Yeah.
Thinking about it subconsciously all the time.
Yeah.
So when I pick up the guitar, I usually write the next 10 seconds in about a minute.
Yeah. Yeah.
It happens pretty quickly. Right. So I'm on to like piece 5 now and they hang together okay, you know, listen to them cohesively. And then I can go back in and kind of change stuff and go, that should go there, whatever. But if someone would have said to me, you've got to write an album of solo guitar arrangements in the next year, I go, I don't even know where to begin.
I don't know where to begin. Yeah.
Whereas if I go, right, 10 seconds of music, right, just 10 seconds, it could be anything.
That's a great approach to songwriting though, in general, isn't it? Just to kind of that feeling of discovery of sound. So you're not just kind of going to the same old patterns and the same old progressions or whatever. That's a really interesting method.
And some of it's come from Julian's game, you know, so from that, say you do that 20 minutes a week, 1 minute a day or whatever, or 1 minute piece, and you try and bring it so it lands in a minute. And some of them work, and some of them I listen back and go, "What was I thinking? You know, what the fuck? What is that?"
Yeah.
Hilariously terrible, you know. But if you've got to kind of work through 10 rubbish ones to get to like 3 good ones, then there's maybe something to work on, you know. So, and that kind of thing, like just try not to make it like too intimidating. and accessible seems to, for me anyway, and it seems to work. You know, it would be like, don't you find that sometimes what players do and people do in life is when they're trying to do something new, they go at it like too hard and it's not sustainable. Do you know what I mean?
Definitely.
It's the same with most things. You know, I've got into running and stuff like that. So you find people go, I'm going to go to the gym every day for 3 hours. It's like, no, you're not, mate. Like, you might keep that up for 2 weeks.
Yeah, you might for the first 2 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas if you kind of go, like, maybe I can fit half an hour in it or whatever, you know, and you pick something that's like, so for the example, I can fit that, you know, okay, so today I'm going to put aside that will happen, you know. In fact, for today, it's already happened, you know, the 10 minutes and just move something on, you know, this thing in Logic or whatever. So what they end up is they're like Frankenstein's monster of drop-ins. Yeah. And then at some point towards the end of the month, I actually just learn it as a piece, you know, and go, okay, that's now, I've now got like 4 minutes now. So I can actually learn that as and one
consolidated
and it becomes a piece which I would never have had, you know, I would never have had it, you know.
That's a really interesting way of writing music. I'm going to try that for, you know, just for like, I'm going to try it for like pop writing and things like that and see what happens. Cause actually that I don't think that only applies to jazz. I think that could apply to like a DJ set or something as well. You know what I mean? I really do.
To other things. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, it might have been something like I might be doing someone a disservice here by not crediting them. I think maybe Julian was on a podcast and someone mentioned like someone had written a book, like how to do a PhD in half an hour a day or something like that. There's a book that's written with that kind of title, you know, something along those lines. Yeah. You know, that it isn't so much about like monumental, intense effort as much as it can sometimes be about just keep dripping on it, you know.
Yeah.
And if you come back at it enough, then things just begin to
full. Yeah. That's an amazing approach. I really
it's not, as I say, it's not mine. Full disclosure, it's not mine, you know, but I've been doing it, you know, and it seems, you know, well, that's kind of the focus in terms of original music at the minute for me, is like just keep adding a little bit to this.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm on to like, you know, I'm coming up to just start on the 5th piece, you know, and once I've got 10 of them, I'm done, you know. Then
that's
it's
amazing,
actually, then it's just playing them.
Then it's just learning and playing. You could just thinking you could call it the ASDA model, really, couldn't you? Everything helps, you know. It's
that's it, yeah. That's good. Yeah, their titles. Yeah, that's the tricky one. That's the hard part, isn't
it? Mate, it's so lovely to talk to you, and thanks again. I really do appreciate it.
You're most welcome. Good luck with everything, and
have a lovely day. Enjoy practicing.
Yeah, we'll do. Take care.
Take care.